the IEO Webinar Series. I am Nicoletta Batini, IEO Lead Evaluator, and I will moderate this webinar. Today, we will talk about the state of climate action in 2022, focusing on energy, food systems, and finance. And as you all know, less than 10 days ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its sixth assessment report, giving an update on climate change globally, looking at ecosystems, at biodiversity, and human communities at global and regional levels. The report also reviews vulnerabilities and the capacities and limits of the natural world and human societies to adapt to climate change. The report documents that the impacts of a fast-warming world are being felt all around the world, and they are more widespread, are coming earlier, and have deeper consequences than predicted. So every report, we get a worsening of the scenarios and a worsening, unfortunately, of the prediction. When looking at risks in the near term, that is risks between 2021 and 2040, in the summary for policymakers, point B3, the report states that global warming reaching 1.5 Celsius in the near term would cause unavoidable increases in multiple climate hazards and present multiple risks to ecosystems and humans. The level of risk will depend on concurrent near-term trends in vulnerability, exposure, level of socioeconomic development, and adaptation. These are all with high confidence. Near-term actions that limit global warming to close to 1.5 Celsius would substantially reduce projected losses and damages related to climate change in human systems and ecosystems compared to higher warming levels, but cannot eliminate them all. As we know, there is still time to avoid, as the report says, the most catastrophic scenarios. But this time now is running out, is really running out, and we have, unfortunately, probably lost quite some time with the pandemic, and now we're entering another area of geopolitical tension. So the questions we will be looking at today focus on policy action. How far exactly have we got in fixing the planet, its climate and biodiversity crisis? How far did COP26 take us in terms of commitments? What's in store from COP27? And where does the energy crisis originate from? What are the global financial and economic risks for the fund members? So these are questions that are all linked to each other. We also will talk about food systems because they're one of the two kind of main causes of climate change and the main cause certainly of biodiversity crisis. And we will talk about the food system crisis and on what economic and financial policies should we focus on. Before we start, I would like to show a couple of slides from the IPCC report, and then I'll go to our guest speakers. Let me see if I can share this. So that if you haven't yet taken a look at the report, you can see it here. So I got a bunch of emails popping up on my screen. This matrix is straight from the summary for policymakers in the report, and it shows impacts of climate change across ecosystems and human systems. And what it shows on, vertically are, the ecosystems, changes in ecosystem structure, the first three columns, then to the center species range shifts related to various types of biodiversity species, and then changes in timing, which is another way to cut the data here. And then in the rows we have regions of the world, and then we also have ecosystems by type of ecosystem. So you can see that in a high or very high confidence, there are impacts expected and occurring in all areas of the globe and in all types of ecosystem structures and species. If we move to, let me go to the next, impacts on human systems, we can see again, looking at the regions, which are the rows here, there's a lot of negative signs. So the negative signs are negative impacts, and the darker they are, the more negative the impact. And we can see that there's basically, you know, a constellation of minuses here, which kind of suggests that we will be and are already experiencing a variety of you know, scarcities in both food, water, and also an increase in infectious diseases and other types of diseases, including diseases related to the discomfort caused by climate change, for example, mental health diseases. And then there's a bunch of impacts on cities, settlements, and infrastructure, which are the final 4 columns here, which can be and are already very severe. It goes from, you know, flooding to damages to key critical infrastructure and damages to key economic sectors. So let me stop sharing this and let me turn to our guest speakers. We have invited today 3 energy and food system top experts. Sama Bilbao y Leon, who's an energy transition expert and director of the World Nuclear Association. Hello, Sama. Gunhild Stordalen, who's a food system and good food finance expert and chair of EAT, spelled E-A-T. Hi, Gunhild. And Gernot Wagner, who's a climate financial risk expert at Columbia Business School. He's on leave from NYU. And we asked them to give us the latest news and their views from the trenches on where we stand on climate action. So I would like to start with Sama, just a brief introduction, although it cannot be brief, but Sama Bilbao y Leon became the Director General of World Nuclear Association in October 2020. She has more than 20 years of experience in nuclear engineering and energy policy, and she has a very diverse professional experience. She worked in the nuclear industry, in academia, and international organizations. And she, you know, has been the director and head of the technical secretariat of the Generation 4 International Forum, head of water cool reactors technology at the IEA, and she holds a PhD in nuclear engineering physics from the University of Wisconsin. So, Sama, without further ado, could you give us an idea, like a tour d'horizon on energy commitments and gaps from COP26 and the coming COP27, the plans for that, in terms of what we thought we needed to do, what we need to do, and what we are doing, especially in the midst of this energy crisis, which we're experiencing with rampant prices. The floor is yours, Sama.
Thank you very much. So what I'll do, if you don't mind, I have a handful of slides to share. I actually follow very closely the directions that you gave me, Nicoletta, to try to frame this within the context of the assessment report from the IPCC. So so let me just very quickly start by first of all thanking you for the opportunity, and maybe also having some thoughts. You know, today is International Women's Day, so I think that you've done a fabulous job putting together a very diverse panel for this particular webinar. So again, just I think that we are moving forward in the improving the recognition of women's rights, and of course just today, because of the complications that we have in the world, perhaps a special thought to all the women in Ukraine and perhaps all the people of Ukraine. So what I wanted to do, first of all, is a summary of what is happening with the 6th assessment report from the IPCC. As you know, this report is going to have 3 pieces, or it's based on 3 pieces. The first one was released last year, and it talked about the physical science basis. And the one that we had released a week ago was the one that was focused, as Nicoletta summarized very well, on the impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. But then don't forget that we have the third part, which is the one that is based, the working group number 3 on mitigation of climate change, that is expected in March, April 2022. And frankly, I think that that is perhaps the one that is going to be maybe more impactful immediately, because this is the specific actions that we may need to take in order to react to all the findings of the other two parts. So maybe a couple of very quick takeaways from these two pieces. So the first one, the one on the physical science, there were the one obvious takeaway that many people in this room, I'm sure, already knew, but it was finally, I guess, or one more time emphasized that the very important influence of humans in the climate change. So this was, the data was very strong, and it showed that. And then the other thing that we have already seen is the fact that these extreme events, weather events, and climate events that we are seeing, we are going to see them intensify in frequency and in strength. So those are the two key takeaways from this first part of the report. The second part, Nicoletta just summarized some of these impacts on impact, adaptation, and vulnerabilities. So I won't repeat this. However, I do want to show you this other slide, which I think is maybe the key message from the entire uh, report, which is what Nicoletta already highlighted. We have a smaller and a smaller window of opportunity to actually act on all these challenges. And you see there all these different paths that we have, but fewer and fewer of these paths are going to remain available to us as we move forward. So as you know, energy is one of the big culprits in this climate change emergency that we are facing right now. As you know, energy and heat is about 2/3 of the global CO2 emissions. So clearly, reducing those have a very big role to play. But from my side, I will tell you what we have been seeing for the last 20 plus years, which is how long I've been working on energy and energy policy. So regardless of how big this challenge is, regardless the urgency of addressing this challenge, the reality is that we have seen very little progress in the last 20 years. I want to maybe focus your attention on this graphic on the very left side of the screen, where you can see that the share of electricity generation that is generated with fossil fuels has not changed since the century started. So it was about 60-some% in the year 2000, and continues to be 60-some% today, despite we have the impression that we've moved ahead, that because we are investing a lot in renewable energy sources and efficiency. The reality is we have not really made a dent. So this tells us that we really have a huge challenge in front of us. And then this challenge becomes even more important because we tend to focus on decarbonization. And of course, decarbonization is a little bit the luxury of the developed world. Clearly, developed world, we need to decarbonize. However, if you ask the developing world, what they really need is to energize. So the question is how we can achieve these two competing goals, right? So on the one hand, we want to make sure that we reduce our dependence on these fossil fuels or emitting energy sources, while we ensure that everybody in the world has eventually access to the development that we enjoy and the quality of life that we enjoy. And of course, we know that energy is going to be a key component of that. So what I also have is, of course, you know that I was going to tell you something about nuclear and what the role of nuclear is going to be within this context. So according also to the IPCC reports, the 1.5 degree report that was released a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, there is a number of scenarios, 90 some scenarios, and in all of them, as you can see in this graphic to your right, nuclear energy has an important role to play. And even in what they call the middle of the road scenario, which is the one in which there is minimum changes on the way we live, which is perhaps what they expect to be more likely, we see that there is an expectation that nuclear energy should take a key role. So that is good. The question is also, is nuclear energy could have an important role, because in addition to decarbonizing electricity, which as you know is what nuclear energy has been doing for the last 5 decades, it is today the largest source of low carbon electricity in developed nations. So the good news is nuclear can also play a very important role to decarbonize heat, which is going to be instrumental to decarbonize other sectors of the economy. For example, we are talking about heating and cooling for buildings. So that is the district heating that we can use nuclear heat, or many industrial processes are using heat that can come perhaps from nuclear generation. And then of course, we have been talking the very important role that hydrogen is going to take as an energy carrier in the green transition. So these are good news in the sense that nuclear can have a big role. And in fact, if you look at the International Energy Agency, they summarize saying that without not only the current generation of nuclear units making as big of a role as possible, basically using them for as long as is feasible from the technical and economic point of view, but also relying on new nuclear, the clean energy transition is going to be difficult and expensive. So that is something that we've seen. So now let me go to just to close this initial discussion, to answer specifically some of the questions that Nicoletta posed at the very beginning. So within this backdrop, we've seen that energy that used to be one of those things that the average person doesn't really think in their everyday life, in their everyday life, it has take a front row seat in many of our lives, and certainly in global geopolitics. So what happened at COP26? So and I'm sure we will hear more points of view. So first of all, I think that for the first time in quite a while, I think that governments started to realize that there was a huge gap between all these commitments, all these net zero goals that many countries have been posing, and the realities of the implementation plans that many countries are putting together. There is a huge gap. And we are seeing how perhaps in the olden days, there was a lot of dogmatism in which energy sources could or could not be used. And I think that more and more, many governments are becoming much more pragmatic, in the sense that we realize that we need to make use of all the proven technologies that we have available to us, because we have, as we know, a very short window of opportunity to address the climate change emergency. So the other thing that has happened, and I'm sure we will hear from Gernot later, maybe more on this, is the a lot of emphasis on environmental, social and government finance and climate finance. And again, that has brought a lot of visibility to energy sources and energy technologies, and has opened a lot of interesting debates as far as the sustainability of the different energy sources, which I think is a very good debate to have as we are looking forward to achieve these climate and development goals. And then finally, I think that both the gas crisis that we saw last year, and also, of course, the Ukraine conflict that unfortunately we are seeing right now, have actually put into focus something that perhaps many countries have forgotten, and is the importance of energy independence and the importance of having local or domestic energy sources that they can rely on, and having some sort of independence, not only from geopolitical situations, but also the weather and the climate. So with this, I think I'm going to stop right here, Nicoletta, and I look forward to the conversation afterwards. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Sama. That was very insightful and clearly rather fast-changing kind of scenarios, both in terms of you know, the evolution of commitments and the feasibility of staying on track, even on this not so ideal commitments. But then on the back of that, you know, a rampant energy prices and a situation which, of course, wrecks avok, you know, both plans and investment decisions by firms. So it's quite a complicated scenario for a transition of the magnitude that we need. I would like now to turn to food systems to give us also here an overview to think what has been happening on that front in terms of sustainability. And also Sama remarked, you know, the counting of GHGs as greenhouse gas emissions by sectors, an IPCC way to cut sectors, and then there's an economic data way to cut sectors. But latest analysis, including by the IPCC, puts the responsibility of food systems for global emissions of between 25% up to 37%, depending on how emissions are calculated. And so I've asked Dr. Gunhild Stordalen to give us a brief overview of the state of climate action on the food systems front. I'm sure you all know Gunhild, but for those who don't, Gunhild is a Norwegian physician, and she's an environmental advocate. She's the founder and executive chair of the EAT Foundation, the one of the EAT Lancet report, by the way, and the co-founder and chair of the philanthropic Stordalen Foundation, the founder of Green Nudge, and she serves on the board of several commercial and nonprofit organizations. She's been engaged in public debate on issues like climate change and public health, being a physician as well as an environmental advocate. And she's focused many years now on transforming the global food system. And she's also now actively engaged through EAT in the Good Food Finance initiative, which partners with the World Bank. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that too, as you talk about you know, food system climate action. So as I asked Sama, could you kindly give us you know, a brief summary of, you know, where are we standing on the food systems front? What happened at COP26? There was not one day dedicated to food systems, but it was a day dedicated to nature, and things did happen on deforestation. So I would leave the floor to you to give us again a tour d'horizon of that area for climate change and biodiversity.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. So I will try to answer your questions as I go through my remarks, but just let me start out saying that it's really, I mean, for climate, it's really about two things. That's food and energy, and rest is footnotes. And we have now the science to say that there is absolutely no path whatsoever to avoiding climate catastrophe or runaway climate change unless we both transform the way we produce our food and also transform the way we consume. And what we really need to start recognizing and reflect in all policies and business and investment activities is that food systems, as you correctly said, Nicoletta, food systems have to go from causing 1/3 of the global emissions to become net carbon sinks by mid-century, meaning food systems must start absorbing and storing massive amounts of carbon in the soil. And this has to happen while food systems are becoming climate resilient and at the same time are providing safe, nutritious diets to 2 billion people more than today, which is a massive undertaking. And for us to even stand a chance of doing that, this transformation has to start now. And of course, this is sobering, to put it mildly, because we are so far away from seeing the change at the scale that is required. And the scary thing is also, in terms of climate, that the current climate models for staying within or below 2 degrees or even 1.5 degree are taking it for granted, or are assuming that this food transformation will happen without us having any 1.5 degree equivalent or any net zero equivalent for what that looked like, and not having this integrated in countries' national determined contributions, which I will get back to. But I think it's also important to recognize that food is contributing with 1/3 of the emissions. At the same time, food systems are the first and most severely affected by climate change. And as a consequence, hunger is now trending up, not down. So meaning global food security is really at stake. And second, COVID-19 is really a dramatic manifestation of the critical risk of business as usual on food. And by now we know that unless we really change course towards healthy and sustainable and equitable food systems, pandemic risks will only continue to increase. And that we now know that the world simply cannot afford. The question now, is there any good news to report from food systems at all? And actually there is, but don't let that be or a sleeping pillow when it comes to recognizing the urgency of the situation and how much change we need and how fast we need to make it happen. But I would like to mention a few things. First, as a result of the first ever UN Food Systems Summit that happened in September last year, more than 120 countries have now embarked on so-called national food systems pathways for getting it right by food on food within this decade. Right now, these pathways are really a mixed bag in terms of quality, and they are not yet integrated into the country's national climate plans. But it's a really important first step and hopefully the beginning of real transformation. The second thing, back to your question about COP26 in Glasgow, we really saw some encouraging signs that governments are starting to realize that both food production, in particular food waste and food loss, but also to some degree that consumption must be included in climate action. Obviously, we still saw no major commitments, no major initiatives, no major financing. But I would argue that it's now possible to see the contours of what meaningful progress will look like by COP27 in Egypt and by COP28 in UAE. And I will get back to this in the closing. The third thing that is worth mentioning is that we are seeing unprecedented mobilization in civil society and, well, broadly defined, so basically non-state actors. And as a result of the work that happened in the UN Food Systems Summit process, the 6 organizations, including EAT, my own organization, decided to join forces and create something we call the Food Forward Consortium, which basically is a massive inclusive coalition of the willing to drive scaled up action towards 2030 and to help create more alignment and more collaboration for collective action amongst non-state actors to really complement what the UN and its coordination hub will be doing. Very briefly, the consortium will work to plug some critical global gaps, including building consensus around updated scientific targets. So basically a 1.5 degree equivalent for food systems that are compliant with the Sustainable Development Goals, that we can mobilize and rally the world behind. Hence why we are setting up a second iteration of the Eat Lancet Commission with 100 times the ambitions and many more partners involved. The second thing is around robust metrics for the true cost and the true value of food flowing from these targets. And this is incredibly important, not least to tackle the rising food prices in an effective and thoughtful way. The third thing is around tracking and monitoring progress. So we are working with, amongst other, Johns Hopkins to set up something we call a Countdown 2030 report that will be independent of this consortium. And finally, the consortium will work together to drive joint advocacy to really get food into the climate negotiations once and for all, and also to help mobilize the global publics to push for change. And the final thing the consortium will help do is to catalyze and support action on the ground. And we will start out focusing on supporting cities transforming their urban food systems and implement science-based targets. And to complement that, we are partnering up with an initiative called Regen 10 with, amongst other, the World Farmers Organization to really scale up regenerative agriculture, carbon storing agricultural in different parts of the world. So we would love to think about how we could work together with you. This is a broad, inclusive tent again. And fourth area of good news is, as you indicated and alluded to, the Good Food Finance Network. Happy to speak more to that in the discussion, but it's basically about getting investors, public and private financing institutions to understand the system's risk and the system's opportunities around food, and basically seeing the shifts we are seeing in energy investments and shifting away from what's unsustainable and healthy towards what is good for all. So happy to get back to that. And actually, the last thing I think it's worth mentioning in my remarks is that, well, we basically know what we need to do. We don't need to wait for any amazing new technology. We have the solutions, and it's basically three big shifts. The first is about transforming how we produce food, so shifting to regenerative, nature-positive production patterns and to a much bigger diversity of crops. The second is to shift to healthy diets. The future is plant-rich, but animal proteins and meat will still play an important role, but the problem and what we need to shift away from is overproduction and overconsumption of industrial cheap meats. And the third thing is to at least cut food waste and food loss by half by 2030, and shifting to circular food economies. And obviously all these three shifts need to happen in parallel, and people need to be at the center and happen in a way that is just and equitable, ensuring decent livelihood for farmers and ensuring affordability of healthy, safe and nutritious food for consumers. I will stop there and rather answer questions. Over.
Thank you, Gunhild. That was very clear, and of course, I fully agree with your reading of the situation and the recipes. And it's, you know, it's reassuring what you say, that we do have the solutions. We know exactly what to do. And I think in the energy area is the same story. I mean, we have some research going on, but we already have the tools to really flip the planet around and put it on a safe path. But from another point of view, that's kind of like it's depressing that we don't make more progress faster, given that we do have the solutions in our hands. It remains.
Nicoletta, sorry to interrupt. I just have to say one thing I forgot, and that is obviously the massive health co-benefits. If we get it right on food, we can save at least 11 million lives every year and improve the health and well-being of hundreds of millions more. So the healthcare costs on countries' public budgets around the world can be dramatically reduced, etc., etc. So there are so many arguments, and obviously to avoid biodiversity collapse, we need to do this as well. So there are so many arguments for why we need to transform food within a decade. Over.
Absolutely, and in fact, nature and foods are very much related, and energy, if done well and sustainably, can help the food transition as well. So there are lots of interdependencies. I would like to spend some time now with Gernot. Gernot Wagner he was with us before and as a discussant, but I invited him back as a speaker because, of course, he's very knowledgeable about climate economics. He is now at Columbia Business School, only from NYU, and he writes the risky climate column for Bloomberg Green. So we're interested in risk. We're interested in knowing what's going on there. And he's the author of 5 books already, including Climate Shock, joint with Martin Weitzman, and most recently, Geoengineering the Gamble. So Gernot, maybe you could give us, the risk side of this. Like, I'm a central banker at Origin, so we always have the outlook and then you have the risk discussion. Although both Gunhild and Sama talked about risk, we're also thinking about financial risks, of inaction, of delays, and especially in the context of the current situation, which is, it doesn't look good. What do you think, Gernot?
It doesn't, I agree. Thank you. And yeah, so let me try to make sort of 3 high-level points, and then spend the rest of the time backtracking from there. But sort of on the IPCC report and the latest and greatest on the climate science, I guess really the main point is what we know is bad, and what we don't is potentially much, much worse. All right, so in risk terms, we can cut off our PDF, the probability density function, not what Adobe gives us, but the probability of things hitting certain temperatures, climate damages, and so on. We can cut that off on the left-hand side quite often. What I mean by that, of course, is sort of positive surprises on the climate risk side are very rare. Negative surprises, in fact, are frighteningly common, which leads climate science, which in many ways is an inherently conservative enterprise, lowercase conservative, right, to underestimate the true damage. So I didn't bring slides today, but I did write a couple columns about this, trying to preview and then provide an overview of the IPCC report. So a couple links in your chat. And what is striking is precisely frankly, first observation, the size of this thing, of the report. 3,700 pages, right? I mean, okay, so brevity has never been a virtue of IPCC, or not a top 10 virtue at least. And the summary is 91 pages, and even the heavily negotiated political summary is still like 30 pages, 30 plus pages, and so right. So it's just this massive document just of the impacts. Right? Sama before sort of gave us the overview of all 3 reports. This is just the second, the one that came out last Monday, 8 days ago. Just of the impacts, 3,700 pages, right? So yes, it's hitting home. There are a lot of diverse risks and damages and so on. And yes, in the sort of the final, the one sort of economic summary box that tries to capture it all in 5 graphs, it's the risks and the uncertainties that dominate. I think that's the one key point on the climate risk side. Okay, point 2, it's not just about those fat tail distributions, tipping points, and so on the negative climate risk side. it very much also is about those tipping points on the positive side, on the socioeconomic side, right? We see this over and over again. Nothing happens for a long time until suddenly everything happens. And of course, now, especially in the context of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, right? Wednesday, 10 days ago, sort of the smart, knowledgeable energy policy analyst on both sides of the Atlantic, and sorry, this is a very Euro-American centric view now, but both in Europe and the US, the view was essentially, it is impossible to get off Russian fossil energy. European gas, US oil, just impossible. And by the way, don't you know that the EU actually imports more, or Germany in this case imports more Russian coal than it does Russian gas, right? So there is just no way, full stop. Okay, well, 6 days later, IEA comes up with a 10-step plan to cut a third to half of Russian gas this year. Today, the European Commission, 10 days, European Commission comes up with a plan, minus 80% Russian gas this year. Full stop of Russian imports well before 2030. And by the way, that plan is still, first analysis, I would say, sort of fairly politically conservative in the sense that it does not include German nuclear, it does not include reopening the Dutch Groningen gas field, and so on and so forth. So there are, even there are additional options possible. And today, like an hour and a half ago, been watching oil prices ever since, President Biden comes out and says, no Russian fossil imports. Turns out we didn't import any coal anyways, and very little gas. But Russian oil, right? 8% of all US imports do come from Russia. 4% of total US oil consumption does come from Russia, or did before the invasion, right? That's basically been an immediate stop in many ways. But now the formalization of that, no fossil imports from Russia. Yes, the oil price increased 7% higher today at the height when Biden's announcement came. By the way, right now it's down again 5%. We're at a plus 2% for the day. And of course, oil prices are pretty high. Is that painful? Yes. Is it a necessary right step in the right direction? Yes, that too. Are there broader implications that we can't even fathom right now, and nobody quite knows what will happen, and so on and so forth? Sure, all of the above. But within 10 days, we took this massive political step. You might call it a gamble, but still, right? Politicians, both sides of the Atlantic in this case, rallied, and didn't quite go all the way. My Bloomberg column a week ago, I called for stop it, Russian gas imports immediately. Well, we didn't get to 100, we got to 80. That's not bad within a week of European Union policy making, given how slow these processes typically work, right? So this my second main point. Sometimes these things
ask a question. Well, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, of course.
So, so that's, of course, it shows that there's maybe a political lever that if were to be activated for whatever crisis, we could proceed faster. But my question is this tenable? I mean, of course, in the course of a war, you might just make a declaration and something happens for 3 weeks. But is this something, I mean, the transition risks accelerated over a schedule of like a month from 20 years, isn't that, I mean, the economic consequences of that might not be tenable for more than a month or 3 weeks or
well, in some sense we will see, right? Is sort of the honest answer, right? Nobody has any idea. I guess sort of 2 points. So one, yes, this is akin to ripping off the Band-Aid, right? Going cold turkey on Russian gas, or you know, whatever mixed analogies you want to use here. So yes, right. This is this is a war mobilization effort, and frankly, it takes a war mobilization effort, right? There are basically bills introduced in U.S. Congress right now along the lines of let's flood Europe with heat pumps, right? Sort of that sort of level of engagement, right? Let's spend $1 billion on U.S. manufacturing in the Midwest to produce the sort of low carbon technologies right here in the U.S. and export to Europe and help along with this transition like now, right? Not quite Defense Mobilization Act type effort, but $1.5 billion for an effort like this almost immediately. That's pretty sizable commitment, right? So yes, right, it takes a lot. And by the way, there's a lot of pain built in too, of course, right? Easy for me to say, right? The guy without a driver's license, right? The vegan Manhattanite, right? Who doesn't care about oil prices in some sense directly, right? Unaffected in his job and so on and so forth. On the other hand, of course, right? So it takes much, much more. Meanwhile, and this, I guess, is right. This is one of the co-benefits, right? Sort of the broad point, and this is what Gunhild, of course, said as well, right? So there are massive co-benefits here. But what us climate folk call co-benefits, what the rest of the world calls benefits, right? Of transitioning off, let's say, the sort of food we know is bad for us, right? We shouldn't be eating anyways. Well, in this case, right, there are, of course, well, to be clear, there are some steps that are temporary steps backward, right? There will be more coal power being produced in Europe now this year as a result of some of these actions. Yes. But, or not but, and with this massive investment now, we are, of course, moving into this transition much, much faster, right? Might be a step backwards every once in a while, but it is a massive, sudden leap forward. It is this akin to ripping off the Band-Aid and realizing that actually your wound heals faster without the Band-Aid than with right? And I think, of course, right, there'll be lots of political fallout, lots of other effects. But again, us climate folk, right, have been talking about forever, right, how addressing climate change takes a war mobilization type effort. We have to pull out all the stops. It takes much, much more societal commitment, every level, and so on and so forth. Well, right now, there is war in Europe. It is a war mobilization effort. And not every step, but plenty of them will in fact be complementary, will in fact push in the right direction, and frankly, do so in an environment that is just very, very different from, frankly, last time we had crises like this. Right? The Arab oil embargo, there weren't that many alternatives. Right? We had Jimmy Carter put solar panels in the White House and address the nation in a cardigan. Well, Ronald Reagan, the cardigan backfired, right? Reagan got elected, not just because of that, but still. And Reagan took the solar panels down again, right? Nobody's going to take down solar panels now, right? They were 100 times more expensive 40 years ago, 10 times more expensive 10 years ago, right? By now they are the cheapest form of electricity in history, according to IEA, right? And that's the right thing to do. We need to make these investments. We should have made them a long time ago. And no, it's not just solar panels, but yes, right, there is plenty, frankly, it's tough to say this, right? Crisis equals opportunity. We are very much still in a crisis here, of course. But yes, it does. And it focuses the mind too.
This was a really good food for thought, Gernot. Thank you so much. I want to follow up on what you just said and ask Sama if what's your take on the impact of the current energy crisis, which didn't start with the Ukraine invasion. It was well before that. We saw, you know, bills just skyrocketing for a number of reasons, and economists tried to understand what was causing that. And there's a number of interpretations of what was pushing prices up, right? You know, supply chain issues. It was, you know, the V-shaped recovery in some countries that came out of the pandemic and so forth. But what's the impact of the now conjugation of those kind of driving forces in your view, and what's going on now with this temporary curtail in supply that we see? And is that gonna, I mean, Gernot thinks this is good news. These are good news. Is this gonna make you think a dent and push, for example, more renewable, more nuclear? I've heard, you know, like in my country, Italy, that they want to open again the coal plants because of this. I don't think it's all good news necessarily. And I read articles saying, you know, taking the other stance and saying, no, this is actually going to retard transition because people are going to like rush towards securing, you know, fossil fuels and energy sources. And in spending time and money in doing that, they're going to delay the process of, you know, restructuring their energy sector, which was at least very timidly underway. So Sama, what's your take on this? You have a something there to add for discussing?
Well, you know, I guess I'm not as good as Gernot. I guess I forgot my glass ball today. I don't know. He's been forecasting this since a few weeks ago. No, what I would say is that certainly this has been a wake-up call for everybody. I hope that the situation that we have right now is not going to be a long-term situation, because frankly, I don't know that it's truly feasible to go on effectively, economically, affordably, in a way that everybody can actually move forward by removing all this this entire region from the world. So I think that that is, so it's been a wake-up call, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to, we need to take a systems approach, and I think this is something that Gunhild mentioned from the food point of view. I think it is the same from the energy point of view. It is not one energy source. It is not, I mean, frankly, even when we look at the energy systems of today, they are nothing like the energy systems of the next few years will be, when we see this coupling between electricity and maybe hydrogen and heat and transport and this and that. So what I really think is, hopefully, governments have realized that they cannot kick the can down the road much longer. Then everybody needs to have an implementation plan, not just a wish list. I mean, because when I look at a lot of the energy policies of many countries, they really are not energy policies, right? They are climate policies, which really are a wish list of, yes, we are going to be net zero by whichever date, but it is unclear how that will happen. So I think that this crisis, and as well as what happened at the end of last year with the shortages of gas and the prices of gas and the rest of it, people are starting to pay attention, and we need to have a system that is balanced, that includes, well, probably many, if not all, proven energy sources. And of course, different countries will do it differently because they have different resources in domestically, but that's what I think it will happen.
I would like to also ask Gunhild to comment a little bit on you know, the prices situation. So there's both a shortage issue now, and because of the pandemic and because of the disruptions on supply chains, but there's also, of course, a food price rampage, which is in part related to that, but is in part related to, the link between agricultural production and fertilizers. And in this, I mean, for a solution is now important, as you said, not just to fix the planet, but to make sure that people can afford these diets and can move on. It was difficult in the past, as for solar panels, say you have to go solar when prices were very high, but because you work with these things, that the prices of, for example, a plant-rich diet has come down, and there's projection of that to come down further if a transition is enacted. So do you have any reassuring comments that if we move a little faster along, we may even be able to not be as dependent, on for example, the link between fertilizer and fuel prices, and how can we get out of this food price inflation problem through a transition? How is the transition going to help on that front? Do you have any views about that?
Thanks, Nicoletta. And just full disclosure, I'm not an economist and I'm not a financing expert. I will prefer to keep my my comments here very high level. But there are a few things that I mentioned in my introductory remarks. One is around that we need to shift food production to regenerative, nature positive, and in a way that is storing carbon. We have an overload of fertilizers in many parts of the world, while we have a very lack of fertilizers in other parts of the world, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, and also looking into principles like agroecology will be important. So there is a lot to be done there. And then it's about true cost and true value of food, and starting to implement true cost accounting. And to start with, one report from the Food and Land Use Coalition named Growing Better, that came out in 2019, estimated that the current costs of inaction, or the hidden costs of failing food systems across health, climate, environment, social inequality is 12 trillion US dollars. Versus the net value generation is only 10 trillion. So it's a massive overshoot of hidden costs that no government is considering in one spreadsheet today. And we have 3 billion people that cannot afford a healthy diet, and forget about sustainable diets, but really healthy diets, the basic needs. And there is nothing inherent in healthy food that should make that more expensive than unhealthy food. But this is basically a result of flawed policies and the current political economy. So what we need to do to make this transformation both just and equitable is to start implementing true cost accounting, and we need to create, or governments need to create, coherent policies where everything from agricultural subsidies through public procurement, fiscal policies, etc., where everything are working towards the multiple objectives or outcomes we need to see from food systems in terms of health, climate, environmental, social, etc. And this is fully doable. And here it is a part of something we call the Food Systems Economics Commission, which is actually the modeling and economic commission that is the basis for the Good Food Finance Network, which is basically doing a stern review on food systems to quantify and verify the numbers from the Food and Land Use Coalition report. What are the cost of inaction versus the cost of action, and how much cost savings and how big are the business opportunities by shifting to a healthy, sustainable, equitable scenario. So to conclude, the current challenges is very much a result of the lack of a holistic approach and the true cost accounting principles being implemented. Over.
I fully agree. I would like to summarize very briefly and then ask you a question for a 1 or 2 minute answers on what you think the fund could do. To summarize what was said today, I think I'm not being too inaccurate if I say that, you know, we basically the climate action state in 2022 is kind of a bit still murky. We had made some at least realization in COP26 that we were committed to things that we weren't acting upon, and we didn't have a system of policies that was you know, conducive to achieve goals that we stated. The approach to policy as the approach to solutions has to be systematic. You know, we need to try to integrate various solutions and not try to go for one solution. The two big areas of action we focus on are certainly energy and food systems. We have the solutions. There's political of course, dragging the feet in enacting these solutions. While I believe that most people want these things to be done and happen, it seems to be a lot of inertia at the higher level. And we know that, you know, that's related, of course, to political, but also corporate interest to some extent. And so that has to be addressed in a way that it's a win-win, you know, for societies and everybody else on the planet. The war and other developments throw, you know, a dark shadow on what's happening. Some read it as maybe a kind of nasty way, but to accelerate transition. Others among the speakers think that it's harder to read what might happen. You know, there are positive and negative impacts. But I would like to come back to you. I found this very interesting, very illuminating, and asking you, adding as a closure, that it's assuring what Gunhild said, that there's a lot of private initiative too, right? Of, you know, civil society that's pushing for things to happen, and consumer preferences have shifted. What do you think the fund could do in this area? And you know, is there a specific ask that you have? We have quite a lot of stuff online today, and this will be recorded and shared. So if you please make it now or be silent forever. I'm kidding. Just tell us what you think. Yeah, let's start with Gernot. 2 minutes. Gernot, what could the fund do, or should do, in addition to what it does already, which is, you know, something, of course.
Help smooth the transition. I mean, okay, so this all sounds fairly glib and sort of highest level, right? But it's about addressing the unknowns and unknowables, the uncertainties, right? With a goal toward, you know, sort of pricing the negative externality implicitly and explicitly, pricing, subsidizing the positive one. I think that needs to be said too, right? So, you know, there's a, you know, famous, infamous maybe sort of series of fund research papers, right? So out of the research shop, Ian Perry, I believe, is the main author, right? Sort of every year the reminder of how highly we subsidize fossil fuels, right? And I always have a little bit of a quibble with that, because it conflates the subsidy, the direct subsidy of fossil fuels, with the unpriced negative externality, right? But of course, both matter, absolutely. And then there's the massive positive externality of doing the right thing, right? That's the flip side, right? So I think it's sort of a recognition of all three, and keeping up the drumbeat, right? It helps to be led by an environmental economist, right? So of course there's a lot of push in that direction for all the right reasons, right? So I think that's one. And then the second is, right now there is a lot of economic anxiety. Of course there is, for good reason, right? And I just gave the very Euro-American centric view before, right? Of course, those who were worst hurt by high oil prices are not in the US or in Europe, right? It's the rich adapt, the poor suffer. So that counts, within the US, it's the poorer, and of course, globally, even more so, right? So providing this stabilization force with an emphasis on whatever you want to call it, but it's just transition or equity front and center, right? So, but that has to be part of the mission, and frankly, part of the focus, right? It's easy for Europe to say, let's, flood the place with heat pumps, right? And yes, we should. And yes, the Norwegians and the Swedes are much better than the rest of Europe already, right? Proving sort of the fallacy of, oh, they don't work in cold climates and so on and so forth, right? Well, Europe can afford to emphasize precisely that, right? The positive externality of heat pumps, subsidizing them up the wazoo. What about the rest of the globe, right? What about providing both the stabilizing force and this emphasis on let's make the necessary investments now, much like Gunhild's global food report, right? Same thing there, right? It takes the upfront investment for reap the benefits later. Well, globally, we see the same story, right? Overall, yes, of course it pays. It would pay to invest in the new system. But, well, somebody, in fact, has to put up the money up front to make that transition possible.
Gunhild, your views for the fund?
So to recap, to make these three shifts happen, the production shift, the dietary shift, and the shift to circular food economies, we need policy reforms, starting out with agricultural subsidies, really. A UN report that came out last fall shows that some 90% of current agricultural subsidies go to something that is harming people and or the planet, which is literally madness. So a complete revamping of public agricultural subsidies. And we also need changes in global trade rules, difficult as that is. And as I also previously mentioned, we need major changes at the consumption end of the spectrum and also changing the incentives there. We really need ministers of finance to wake up and smell the roses and see the opportunities that lies in shifting to healthy, sustainable and equitable. And obviously, as we've been touching up on, the current geopolitical situation and the rising food prices we are seeing makes this a challenging proposition, fully aware of that. But as I think Gernot also mentioned, the consequences of not acting and what we don't yet know are far, far worse. And again, I mean, the stability and even the viability of our economies are at stake here. And to what the fund can do, I mean, we really need to start aligning finance more broadly behind the transformation agenda, both public and private finance. And we need to design suitable financial instruments that can drive and support change, something that the Good Food Finance Network is all about. So I will share Joe Robertson, who is now coordinating from our side the network. So if you would like to get in touch, please feel free. And then we really need you at the IMF to take food systems into active consideration when you advise countries and when you design your financial support programs. And my final point is just what success will look like through both upcoming COPs, food action as climate action. We really need to see breakthrough commitments, meaning steering a good chunk of the committed 130 trillion investment to net zero by 2050 that has to go to food systems transformation. And I would say we need at least 1/3, since food is 1/3 of the emissions. We also need to see some major commitments and initiatives on regen ag for climate adaptation and climate mitigation. We also need initiatives on healthy, sustainable, and 1.5-degree compatible diets. And then we really need to start discussing how do we get food into countries' national determined contributions in a major way. And this has to be the new normal. And then final thing, food systems need to be embedded into the negotiated outcomes. I will stop there. Over.
Well, lots of pledges there, but I think really spot on. And I agree. I was a co-author of that UN report that you mentioned. And, I think we really put the spotlight on the issue on agricultural subsidies. And the fund is already starting to talk about this in some of its reports. Unfortunately, not too many, but we also had a box in the US, Article 4, for example. Now, New Zealand's going to come up with something, policy advice there. So, slowly but surely, I hope that your dreams, which are everybody's dreams in this area, come through. I want to quickly go to Sama for a concluding statement on, a pledge for the fund and a plea for the fund, and then we'll conclude. Sama.
Thank you so much. So I would say that what is needed from the fund is what I would say is a little bit of additional thought leadership, in the sense that the energy transition is going to cost, as we heard, not only a lot of money, but it's not going to be easy. And unfortunately, not everybody is going to suffer the consequences in the same way as we heard from Gernot. So the rich countries probably will be able to adapt much better. So we need to make sure that this is going to be a just transition, that all countries in the world, everybody in the world, is going to have access to affordable, clean, reliable energy. So in that sense, what we really need are policies that are looking at the global energy systems in a way that is technology neutral and science-based. Basically, we really need to look at the system not already knowing what the answer is. We actually need to assess what is the optimum combination of resources and technologies in order to achieve that. So for that, we need policies that are as I said, technology neutral and are based on science. We also need to reevaluate our energy markets. I think that since the energy technologies are changing dramatically, the old traditional energy markets are no longer really working very well. They are not serving basically almost anybody very well, certainly not the consumers, and in many cases not the producers of the energy. So we need to reform those. So in that sense, I think that the fund can also help incentivize investment at a global level in those energy systems of the future. And I think that this is a win-win situation. Whoever invests in the energy systems of the future probably will get plenty of rewards on their investment themselves. But as we heard before, the benefits are beyond the fact that we are going to decarbonize or we are going to have reliable energy systems. We are going to see the impacts in health. We are going to see the impacts in economic development. We are going to see the impacts in equity among all the people in the world, just because they all are going to have access to affordable, clean, reliable energy.
I think that's a great note to conclude this seminar. This was very enlightening, and think we have a plan. I think the plan has been written, and we now hope that collectively at the fund and outside the fund, you know, we see the light, the need, and the rewards are waiting for you know, now well-due action on this front. But thank you so much for giving us these overviews and for being with us today. And we will reach out to you with question if we need, as we ourselves try to, you know, move things along. Thank you so much.